Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we're just gonna dive straight into this one because it is absolutely intense. Today, we're breaking down the anatomy of real-life home invasions and stalking encounters. We are gonna look directly at the raw source material of true lived experiences to really understand those deep, primal human instincts. You know, the kind of hardwired responses that actually keep us alive when our ultimate sanctuaries are breached.
So, I want you to start by asking yourself something. What is your absolute deepest fear when you're totally isolated? Seriously, picture it. You're in the perceived safety of your own home, the doors are locked up tight, the lights are off for the night. What exactly goes through your mind when you hear a noise that just doesn't belong? Now that quote right there, that is not dialogue from some Hollywood horror movie. That is the literal, terrifying reality experienced by a 23-year-old. And honestly, this sets the perfect stage for our analysis today. We're going to track the entire escalation of threats, starting from the tricks our own minds play on us, all the way to that split second when the danger is literally breathing right next to you. So let's start with stage one, paranoia versus reality. This is the very first stage of the threat escalation arc, the psychological terror of isolation. Take this source account, for example. We have a 30-year-old man, he's home alone in a 2-story house, and he suddenly wakes up at 1 a.m. Clear as day, he hears his sister calling his name from downstairs. So, he gets up to check, flicks on the light, and there's nobody there. But then he distinctively hears an object drop in her empty bedroom. His immediate assumption? Well, obviously his sister must be home. But the reality? He texts her the very next morning, and it turns out she was 20 miles away the entire night. The house was completely, utterly empty. So the absolutely crucial point here is how isolation actually affects the human brain. What this man likely experienced was an auditory hallucination. The guy had been watching scary movies in the dark right before falling asleep, and the source material shows us how isolation, when you combine it with those environmental triggers, pushes our brain into this intense state of evolutionary hypervigilance. It's kind of like your brain is literally manifesting perceived threats out of the darkness just to force you to stay on high alert.
Moving on to stage two, the external threat.
But what happens when the threat isn't just a trick of the mind? The danger actually becomes real, which triggers our primal freeze response. Let's look at this incident from Newark, Ohio, back in July 2013. A teenager is left home alone for a week. It's late at night, they're just hanging out on the back deck near a wooded area, smoking weed and relaxing. Totally normal, right? Well, suddenly, cutting right through the music they're playing, they hear a deep male voice calling out from the tree line. The voice says, "Hey, over here, we need help, street in front of you." Now, this wasn't just some neighborhood kid playing a prank. This was a highly calculated predatory lure specifically designed to draw an isolated victim out into the pitch black. Let's walk through how this deceptive lure actually unfolds. First, the voice calls out for help. Next, the victim, just trying to be a good Samaritan, actually steps off the deck and moves toward the woods. But then comes the chilling confirmation. Right in front of you, I see you. And it was in that exact, terrifying moment that the victim's survival instinct just completely took over. Their gut absolutely dropped, and they instinctively began walking backward, flat out refusing to turn their back to the woods. Honestly, I have to ask you, would you have called out to that voice in the woods? I mean, it's human nature to want to help someone in distress. But the reality here is just terrifying, because the source notes that after the victim finally backed inside and locked all the doors, that very same man appeared from behind the backyard pool. He was aggressively banging on the glass doors, screaming and just laughing manically into the night. We see a really similar, terrifying external threat in our next account. This time, it's a 14-year-old boy. He's left alone while his mother, who is an RN, works an overnight shift at the hospital. He's upstairs in his bedroom, just watching TV, when he hears this horrible sound of a heavy chair being dragged across the backyard deck right below him. The actions of this silent watcher are just beyond creepy. The young boy looks out his window and sees a man standing down there, staring right back up at him. And the man stays frozen there for 5 solid minutes, doesn't move an inch. When the boy finally works up the courage to ask what he wants, the man just silently wheeze-laughs. It's awful. But the victim beautifully utilizes that primal freeze response we talked about, which is an evolutionary tactic to avoid detection by a predator. He literally rolls himself into a ball in the dark and refuses to even light up his phone screen. Ultimately, the intruder tries to breach both the front and back doors before finally giving up. I mean, if those doors had been unlocked, the outcome would have been tragic for sure.
Okay, let's get into stage 3, the internal breach.
This is it, the final and absolutely most terrifying stage of this explainer. When physical barriers fail entirely and the threat is actively inside the house with you, the ultimate violation of sanctuary. It's past midnight. A 10-year-old boy is home alone on a Friday night because his parents had to frantically rush his older brother to the hospital with a broken leg. Suddenly, the boy hears the front door open. Naturally, he assumes it's his parents returning, so he steps out of his room, looks down over the upstairs banister, and sees 3 tall strangers just standing there in his unlit living room. You can just feel the agonizing terror this 10-year-old must have gone through. He quietly retreats and hides himself behind some boxes in his closet. And here is the timeline. His bedroom door creaks open. 5 seconds pass, and heavy footsteps approach his bed. He can literally hear them shifting his covers around. 10 more seconds pass, and the footsteps slowly move toward the closet. Then, the closet door opens. And then, just dead silence. 20 seconds. I want you to really just emphasize that number in your mind for a second. The sheer, suffocating horror of 20 seconds of dead silence. He's holding his breath, knowing the intruder is standing right there, looking in. The intruder may or may not have actually seen the crouched child before simply walking away to steal some valuables. And the kicker? In their absolute panic, the parents had rushed out to the hospital and accidentally left the front door completely unlocked.
Now, let's shift gears for our final story, which goes to show that the dead of night isn't the only time we need to be vigilant. This was a daytime intrusion. We've got a 23-year-old guy. He's just outside playing basketball in his own driveway in the middle of the day. Suddenly, he glances up and spots a strange woman watching him from his own upstairs window.
So he doesn't hesitate. He immediately runs inside, grabs a neighbor for backup, and they execute this frantic but incredibly thorough house clearing process. First, they sweep the upstairs bedrooms and the bathroom. Nothing. Then they clear the main floor, the living room, the kitchen. Nothing. Finally, they scour the basement and both closets down there, finding nothing but winter coats. I mean, they literally checked every single corner they could possibly think of. So his assumption was completely logical, right? Since they scour the entire house, the intruder must have slipped out the unlocked back door while he was outside getting his basketball. He felt this false sense of peace, the adrenaline wore off, and he went to sleep. But the horrifying reality? She actually never left. She was quite literally right beneath him the whole time. And this brings us right back to that quote from the beginning. This is the climax, where the primal fight instinct just violently takes over. He's drifting off to sleep with the ceiling fan whirring, and he starts hearing a strange human-like sound. He rolls over, and a woman, who later turned out to be a known local meth addict named Karen, is actively crawling out from under his bed. Pure, unadulterated survival instinct kicks in. He screams, tackles her, and rustles her to the ground, restraining her until the police arrive, getting totally caught up in the struggle. His meticulous house clearing missed the one single spot right under where he slept.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer. It leaves us with this really haunting realization about how our primal instincts engage the second our sanctuary is breached. Whether it's the paranoia of the mind, freezing in the face of an unknown external threat, or literally fighting for your life inside your own bedroom, the human will to survive is just incredible. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on. When you go around and lock your doors tonight, are you keeping the danger out, or are you actually locking yourself in with it?
All right, let's jump right into it. Today, we're basically strapping in for a high-stakes mission briefing. We're breaking down a run-through one of the most chaotic, labyrinth-like 3D puzzle horror environments out there, Ice Cream 4. But, we aren't just looking at this as your standard survival horror game. No way! We're dissecting this whole thing as a highly calculated multi-phase heist. We're going to examine exactly how a player turns a terrifying kidnapping scenario into this masterful prison break, using nothing but their wits, a few scattered tools, and a very precise sequence of events. Okay, so let's really dive into this, because the very premise of this breakout is just absolutely audacious. The player didn't just stumble into this trap by accident. As our inside source literally admits, they intentionally ate the villain's special recipe ice cream to pack on some pounds, knowing for a fact it would make them a prime target for Rod, the terrifying ice cream uncle. And why? So they could purposely get kidnapped, infiltrate his massive factory, and reunite with their captured friends. It's this brilliant, completely backwards Trojan horse strategy. They got themselves locked on the inside entirely on purpose. Now, really quick, before we launch into the actual extraction plan, I gotta point out a wild stat mentioned right at the start of this infiltration. 58%. According to the source, 58% of you watching this explainer right now haven't officially joined our heist crew by hitting subscribe. So if you love breaking down complex strategies and these kinds of structured deep dives, hit that button and let's bring that number down. All right, anyway, back to the factory.
So, looking at the master plan here, what looks like just chaotic wandering through a massive factory is actually a strictly ordered 4-step extraction plan. Step 1, infiltrate the factory, which, as we just established, check, successful. Step 2, escape the initial cage. Step 3, defeat the giant security robot, Boris. And finally, Step 4, save the friends from the control room. It's a solid checklist.
Right, so kicking things off with Phase 1, escaping the initial cage.
The player wakes up in this extraction room that's just filled with cages. Their friends, Mike, Liz, and Charlie, are locked up right in front of them. Naturally, the first attempt is just brute force. The player grabs a wrench off a nearby bench and busts their own cage's weak lock. But here's the kicker. The friends' cages don't have standard locks. They have these advanced electrical lock systems with red lights. Brute force simply is not going to cut it. And then, suddenly, alarms start blaring and Rod captures the player, dragging them off to a totally different, much more secure cage. So, this initial failure actually forces a major pivot to a stealth approach. In the new cell, the player manages to find a hidden key tucked behind a painting, unlocks the door, and actually crawls through a ventilation shaft to slip out completely undetected. So boom, Phase 1 is complete.
Moving right along to Phase 2, defining the enemy.
So the crucial point here is that you really need to know exactly who is hunting you in this maze before you can effectively navigate it. And there's a very clear hierarchy of threats patrolling this factory. First up, you've got Rod, the ice cream uncle himself. He's the main threat, the enforcer who will physically knock you out and reset your progress. But, Rod can't be everywhere at once, and that's exactly where the mini-rods come in. These are smaller, little cleaning robots. They aren't actually going to attack you, but they act as mobile security alarms. If they spot you, they make a ton of noise, which instantly summons Rod right to your location. And finally, there's Boris. Now, Boris isn't patrolling at all. He is a giant, menacing robot stationed like a bouncer directly in front of the control room. Boris is the ultimate roadblock standing between the player and their friends.
Which brings us right to Phase 3, gathering the escape tools.
Now that we know the threats, we need a solid way to deal with Boris. And that kicks off a massive, factory-wide scavenger hunt. Because to take down a giant robot in this place, you don't need, like, a bazooka. No, you need a stepladder, a fire extinguisher, super sticky gum, 3 colorful ice creams, and a red carpet. I know, it sounds like a totally ridiculous shopping list, right? But every single item is a vital, interlocking puzzle piece here. The player grabs a stepladder in the warehouse so they can reach some high scaffolding. They snag a fire extinguisher from the hallways. To get the super sticky gum, they actually have to power up a candy machine by scouring the factory for 3 specific ice creams, like pink and yellow ones. Oh, and they need an ID card off a broken robot just to open a cabinet to get that red carpet. It sounds like absolute madness, but believe it or not, this is exactly how you build a heist arsenal in this game.
All right, Phase 4, setting the perfect trap. With our crazy inventory full, it's time to actually bring all these bizarre items together to neutralize our final roadblock, Boris. So the player notices Boris is standing near this cracked section of the floor, but they can't break it from underneath. This is where the trap comes into play. Step 1, the player uses the stepladder to climb up to the scaffolding directly above the cracked floor, and they just drop the heavy fire extinguisher to smash a hole right through it. Step 2, they apply that super sticky gum they got from the candy machine all around the edges of this newly created hole. And Step 3, they carefully lay the red carpet over the hole. The gum anchors the carpet so it doesn't just, fall through. Basically what we have here is a perfectly engineered, cartoon-style pitfall trap.
Now we're into Phase 5, cracking the code. So the trap is set, but there's a massive problem here. Boris is fast asleep. The player needs to wake him up and get him to actually walk onto that carpet, which requires a weapon loud enough to do the job. And this brilliantly illustrates the logical deduction required to pull this whole thing off. The weapon, an electrogun, is locked behind a door that needs a 4-digit code. The player finds these random numbers written in red blood on the walls throughout a museum section of the factory. But how do you order them? Well, the player realizes the entrance to the museum is marked with the letter A right next to a red carpet. By simply walking the path of the red carpet in order from start to finish, they uncover the digits sequentially. First a 0, then a bit further down a 4, then a 2, and finally at the very end of the path, an 8. It literally turns a massive, confusing maze into a really simple linear breadcrumb trail. With the sequence confirmed, the player sneaks back to the locked room, carefully dodging those mini-rods, inputs the code 0428, and boom, the door unlocks. The player successfully secures the electrogun belonging to their friend Mike. This is the absolute climax of the puzzle-solving phase. We finally have our bait.
And that leads us to the grand finale, Phase 6, the control room breakout. All the pieces are on the board. The trap is laid, the weapon is drawn. It's time to execute this thing. The player creeps up to where Boris is sleeping, right past our hidden pitfall trap. But here is the genius bait and switch of the whole operation. They aren't using the electrogun to destroy the giant robot. I mean, it wouldn't even be strong enough to do that anyway. Instead, they fire the gun purely as a high-voltage alarm clock. The loud blast wakes Boris up. He gets super enraged seeing the player and just blindly charges forward to attack. And in his blind rush, he steps straight onto that red carpet, completely missing the fact that there is literally no floor underneath him. The trap works flawlessly. The heavy robot falls straight through the hidden hole, completely clearing our path forward. The player rushes past the now empty guard post, bursts right into the control room, finds the master computer, and hits the main unlock button. And then we see it happen. Those advanced electrical locks on the cages finally disengage. Mike, Liz, and Charlie burst out of their cells, celebrating their freedom. The heist, exactly as planned, is a total, massive success.
But wait a second. The cages are open, yes. The friends are reunited, for sure. But they are all still standing right in the middle of Rod's massive, heavily guarded ice cream factory. They've won the battle, but the war to escape to the outside world is far from over. The player just pulled off this absolutely incredible tactical breakout to get everyone out of their cells. But what incredible lengths are they going to have to go to in order to actually see daylight again? It really leaves you wondering just how complex the next master plan will have to be. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the puzzles around you.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a true crime case that really brings to life a terrifying real-world horror. We're talking about domestic abuse, and specifically how it can escalate into unimaginable violence right behind closed doors. We're looking at the tragic murder of 22-year-old Lisa Dodd. Look, this isn't just a story about a crime. It is a chilling dissection of how a volatile situation can transform into an absolute living nightmare.
So at 1 p.m. on June 9th, a 911 call completely pierced the afternoon quiet. Heidi Noel hadn't heard from her 22-year-old daughter, Lisa, in over 15 hours. Imagine arriving at your daughter's apartment in Alton, Illinois, pushing open the unlocked door, and finding a scene so utterly gruesome that you physically have to back out, shaking. Neighbors actually watched in pure dread as Heidi made this chilling call, screaming, "My daughter's boyfriend killed her. He chopped her head off."
But to really understand what Heidi found in that room, we have to rewind just a bit. Just past midnight, hours before Heidi even arrived, local CCTV captured footage of a man walking down a quiet residential street. He was carrying a white laundry basket. He casually walks behind a local smoke shop and just disappears from view. Now, at the time, it looked completely mundane, right? Just an ordinary midnight errand. But that single ordinary object held a secret so horrifying, it honestly defies belief. What was in the white laundry basket?
Section 1. The gruesome discovery.
Okay, the morning after that CCTV footage was recorded, a local contractor was doing his job, throwing out some old drywall into a large red dumpster on the street. But instead of construction debris, he finds a pile of discarded male and female clothing, some laundry baskets, and a pair of red slippers that were absolutely covered in blood. But it gets worse. The most unsettling find was a short, serrated paring knife. The contractor picked it up by the handle, only to realize the blade was completely coated in blood. It was the very first terrifying signal to this quiet neighborhood that a massive atrocity had occurred.
When police finally entered apartment number 4, they essentially walked into a horror movie. They found 22-year-old Lisa lifeless on her bed. She was 8 months pregnant with a little baby girl her family called Baby Bean. But the true horror of this scene was the absolute desecration of her body. Her killer had actually wrapped her severed neck in a towel, shaping it just like a turban. There was no murder weapon anywhere in the room, and there was no head.
Section 2. A tricky relationship.
So how did we get here? Well, two vastly different paths were colliding. You have Lisa, who was vibrant, she loved animals, worked at a local Dairy Queen to save up for a career in the medical field, and she was so incredibly excited about her upcoming baby shower. And then there was her boyfriend of nearly 2 years, DeAndre Holloway.
DeAndre struggled heavily with substance abuse, had a history of homelessness, and subjected Lisa to a highly unstable lifestyle. I mean, at one point, the two of them were actually living in a tent. His mental state was rapidly spiraling. In fact, just days before the murder, he texted a friend saying he was too angry to talk, writing, "My cup filled up, and now it's got to spill over."
And this violence, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. The abuse was escalating at a truly terrifying pace. In July 2021, DeAndre broke Lisa's nose, landing her in the hospital with 2 black eyes. By September, Lisa was desperately texting her boss, literally begging for shift coverage so she could go hide at her mother's house because DeAndre had threatened to harm her and her unborn baby. And then, early the next year, a coworker actually witnessed DeAndre punching Lisa squarely in the face while they sat in her car in the parking lot. Lisa was trapped in this horrific cycle, and she was terrified to call the police.
Section 3. The final 24 hours. The day before the murder, DeAndre disappeared without a trace. Lisa, who was heavily pregnant and incredibly stressed, texted her mom, Heidi, worried that he had left for good. Heidi, knowing exactly how dangerous DeAndre was, actually tried to comfort her daughter. She texted back, "If this is how it's meant to happen, at least it was non-violent, and you've been set free." Heidi genuinely believed the nightmare was ending, and ending safely. But tragically, the true nightmare was just about to begin.
The events of June 8 unfold almost like a ticking clock, and it's incredibly suspenseful when you lay it all out. At 8 p.m., Lisa gets a message from DeAndre's uncle saying he's bringing DeAndre back. Against her mother's urgent advice, Lisa agrees to go pick him up. At 9:11 p.m., CCTV captures Lisa and DeAndre arriving back at apartment 4. It is the absolute last time Lisa is ever seen alive. 10:49 p.m., Heidi texts her daughter, "You okay?" Total silence. 11:57 p.m., the camera catches DeAndre walking out of the apartment alone. He's changed his clothes, he's wearing a face covering, and he is carrying that white laundry basket.
Section 4. The sounds of murder.
Now, the neighbors downstairs were pretty used to the couple fighting, but they noted this night was entirely different. Around 9:30 p.m., they noticed Lisa's front door was cracked open. Then they heard it, this muffled yelling. One neighbor described it as the horrific sound of someone screaming in absolute pure pain, but with a hand clammed heavily over their mouth to muffle it. Moments later, the physical violence upstairs escalated so severely that the neighbor's own apartment actually began to violently shake.
The screaming just kept growing incredibly loud and intense. And then, right around 9:50 p.m., they heard something that will no doubt haunt them forever. A neighbor said it had like 5 or 6 loud thuds. It sounded like chopping wood. It was very constant beats. And then it just stopped. The neighbor noted the steady, sickening rhythm of it, like someone lifting up, putting all their weight into it, over and over again. And when the thumping stopped, the screaming stopped, the shaking stopped. The horrific, chilling realization here is that they were listening, right through the ceiling, to a serrated paring knife rhythmically decapitating an 8-month pregnant woman.
Section 5. Catching the Killer.
What followed was just a manic, totally chaotic sequence of events. Just past midnight, CCTV catches him dumping that white laundry basket, which of course we now know contained Lisa's head, into a nearby construction dumpster, along with the bloody clothes and that serrated knife. By 2:30 a.m., he shows up at his mother's house driving Lisa's car, pacing nervously and banging on doors. The next morning, his family finds him manically chopping off his 2-year-old dreadlocks in the bathroom, bizarrely claiming he needs a fresh start, right before throwing his remaining clothes in the outside trash. He then just hands Lisa's ID, debit card, and keys to his incredibly bewildered grandmother and flees on foot. When he was eventually arrested in a neighboring town for cannabis possession, his behavior was so completely erratic, he was literally banging his own head against the police station wall.
Section 6. The verdict and warning.
So in January 2025, swift and incredibly heavy justice was finally handed down, 60 years in total. That's 30 years for the first-degree murder of Lisa Dodd, 20 years for the intentional homicide of Baby Bean, and 10 years for concealing the horror, all of those sentences to be served consecutively. Even DeAndre's own stepfather publicly acknowledged the act as one of extreme, monstrous evil, though he did cite failures in the mental health system that had let DeAndre slip through the cracks for years.
After a while, you learn that even sunshine burns if you get too much. So you plant your own garden and decorate your own soul, instead of waiting for someone to bring you flowers. That poem was once shared by Lisa, and it stands as a beautiful but deeply heartbreaking contrast to the darkness of her final moments. The prosecutor noted this profoundly moving, tragic detail from the crime scene.
As Lisa died, her hand was found resting on a book about pregnancy. Literally, her very last thoughts were of her unborn child.
We're going to end this explainer with an impassioned plea from Lisa's mother, Heidi. She stood in that courtroom and warned everyone watching, and it's a message we all need to hear. If someone is controlling your every movement, if they demean you, if they threaten your life in any way, believe them. Do not wait for things to get better. This case is proof of the horrifying extremes domestic violence can reach behind closed doors. Reach out to local resources and make a safe plan to leave, because your life truly depends on it. Take a hard look at the relationships around you. If someone is controlling you or threatening your life, do you have a safe plan to leave?